Hey Wargamers, welcome back to the channel Death from Above Wargaming. I'm Aaron and I'm back with another Battlytics analysis from the Mercenaries Kickstarter. We're going to look at the Locust IIC. When I saw this model, I was very impressed with it. I thought it was a cool little design. I was never much interested in the Locust IIC. The original artwork in the old TRO, you know what I'm talking about, the full color one, that was very, very cool, but the new model really hits home for me. So I took a look at the base Locust. It's a bunch of ER small lasers. It's a medium pulse laser. It was okay. I started browsing Mech and I found the Locust IIC5. I thought this thing was really, really cool. Lots of versatility. I'll tell you why as we dig into it. But first, some basics on this thing. Built in 3060, it is a clan second line light mech with a battle value of 878. So not terrible. It is a 25-ton mech, so still on the small side. A little bit bigger than your standard Locust, the Inner Sphere variety. Movement is the same, though, 812, and it does dissipate 20, so it's got 10 double heat sinks. Standard engine, standard gyro, standard cockpit, endo steel structure, and it's got 4 tons of ferrofibrous armor for 76 pips, which is pretty good for this size mech. Armor distribution looks good to me. The arms are protected. That's where its primary weapons are. It's got a little bit off on the torsos, a little bit off on the legs and the head, but overall, I think fairly acceptable for a 25-ton mech. Fun fact: it does have only upper arm actuators, so it can arm flip. In each arm, it's packing a clan ATM3, so very, very cool there. They're neat weapons, very versatile, and it also has a clan ER medium laser, which is phenomenal as well. What's interesting is on the ammunition side, it only has 1 ton for those ATMs, and it's only standard ammunition. So you can't buy, I wish you could buy ATM ammo in half-ton increments, but I don't think that you can. So this only has standard ammunition. Standard ammo has a minimum range of 4, and then it's 5, 10, 15 for short, medium, and long, respectively, and it does 2 points per missile. So basically, it's packing like a longer range SRM-6, if you want to look at it that way. But anyway, I think this thing has some potential. Again, it's priced right. It's got good weapons. And I do think there's some versatility that can be unlocked with this design. We'll talk about that. But stick around, guys. We'll get into the analysis. Battlytics on the Locust IIC5 is coming right up. All right, so here we are with the offensive benchmarks. So pretty standard here. It can't build up any heat. It doesn't jump, obviously, and it has a lot of heat sinks. 10 doubles is more than enough to handle the load from these weapons. So you'll see the damage ticks up, obviously, at 15 hexes, 15 inches, depending on how you're playing. And then again at 10, and then again at 5, but then it starts to tip off once you get into the minimum range of those ATMs. So optimal range for this thing is really around 5 inches essentially, because once you get into 4, you start taking a penalty. Overall damage, though, in 12 turns was 86.12. This is really, really good for a 25-ton mech. Now, granted, it is a clan mech. It's still very, very solid. A couple of comparisons on the cumulative benchmark at the bottom. The Jenner JR7F, right? This is the 4 medium laser variant. That clocked in at 52.3. Obviously, that one is a little bit range constrained, which is why the damage numbers are a little bit lower. This Locust can hit out sooner, which brings those numbers up. I also added the Wolfhound WLF2 to this speedometer, if you will. So I pulled in the numbers from that. That was 104.4 on the benchmark, which I think the Wolfhound for me is kind of like the gold standard of light mechs. I mean, it's tough. It does damage. It moves pretty well. So compared to the Wolfhound, obviously it does a little bit less, but the Wolfhound is 10 tons heavier. So just to kind of give you an idea of where this Locust falls overall. So pretty good. I'm happy with it. Now, on the lethality index side, it only managed to kill the Javelin 19.8% of the times in the 10,000 simulations, right? So the Javelin is a bigger mech, so I'm not surprised there. Most of the kills came from just coring it out, followed by, obviously, engine kills. Head kills was the smallest percentage there. It doesn't really have any decapitating weapon, so it would rely on like an ER medium hit followed by a couple of rounds of missiles or something along those lines. Damage per hit was 2.8. Critical hits is pretty good. It's approaching 4. So again, it does have that crit finding capability with those ATMs. The time to kill was 15.82. Again, 10 is like our average, but this is a 25-ton mech. So all things considered, it's not the worst. It's not going to kill a lot of things, but again, this is a light mech. Use it accordingly. A couple of things I want to talk about, and we'll hit this maybe a bit more when we get into the roles, is the flexibility baked into the ATM. So, as you buy this thing out of the book, it has 2 tons of standard ammunition. But what if, you loaded the left arm with high explosives and the right arm with extended, or the right arm with standard and the left arm? You could mix and match these things. You could go double high explosive, right? Obviously, that would cut back on the range a little bit, but you'd be doing a lot more damage, earlier or later in the game, when you get into close range. So depending on the terrain and how, your opponent's force is situated and what else is in your star or lance, you could really tune this thing to be battlefield specific. And I think that's a really cool and neat feature of a, very low cost 878 battle value mech. So I thought that was kind of neat. Something for you guys to consider as we talk through this. But let's get into the defensive benchmark. Let's see how this thing did there. All right, so here we are. Again, we talked about the armor. I think the distribution's fine. It is a little bit light in the rear, but it's fast enough that you shouldn't really necessarily have things in your rear arc for a long period of time. The torso is a little bit light, but we're talking about a couple of pips, and I'd rather have that armor on the arms where those valuable ATMs are. On the mobility analysis side, you'll notice that 24.5% is pretty high. I'll explain this one in a minute. So the armor on the Locust legs is 10. The structure is 6. So a PPC shot doesn't get into the internal structure. The armor will absorb all of it. The second shot blows the leg off. When you lose the leg, obviously, your TMM, your target modifier, I should say, is going to significantly drop. You're just going to be laying around or hobbling around or hopping on one leg. So when this thing does take 2 leg shots, it's basically, it's completely crippled. So you see a significant drop off because of that. It doesn't really sustain more than a couple of shots to the legs, and mobility is critical for the survival of this mech. Now, speaking of survivability percentage, it was 46.1%. I think that's pretty darn good for a 25-ton mech. If you look at that area chart on the right-hand side there, you'll see that this Locust clocks in just above, like significantly above, maybe 10% above peers in its similar battle value range. So for mechs that are in that 800 to 900 battle value range, most of them are surviving around 33%. This one is at 46%, so very, very good. So it's outperforming in terms of survivability. And I think that, has to do with the fact that it does have a good TMM, but it can absorb a shot or two before things go internal. Like some of the inner sphere lights, you take a PPC shot and you're losing a side torso. So I think it's very good that this thing has such a significant amount of armor and it can weather a couple of shots. All right, so overall, happy with the defensive benchmark. Again, we're talking about a 25-ton mech, so going up against an awesome, surviving almost half the time, I think that's really, really good. Now, let's take a look at efficiency and see if this thing is worth the battle value. All right, so the survey says 5.52 on the efficiency. That's really not bad. Most mechs, so that purple area in the efficiency rating area chart there in the middle of the left side screen, that purple area represents sort of the bell curve of every mech that we've looked at, right, and where they fall. So whether it's a clan assault mech or an inner sphere light and everything in between, this thing falls right in the middle. So it is pretty solid in terms of bang for buck. I think our actual average is somewhere right around 6, so this thing is just a little bit below average. But again, there is, with light mechs, they tend to be lower. So this one's really blowing the doors off its counterparts there. So if you look at the shadow chart underneath, I think that underscores it. So this is only light mechs in the black area below, and it shows where the sort of the bell curve is, and you can see most of the light mechs are in that 4 range. There's a significant number, to the right side of 4, and that's where this Locust falls. But there's definitely a minority in 5.5 and up. The majority of the mechs are, probably 4.5 and below. So in that regard, I think this thing is definitely a good bang for buck. A couple of things I want to point out. In the efficiency analysis in the top left, you'll see that purple line, which represents our effective ACD, which combines the optimized ACD with the survivability of this mech. So you'll see there's a drop-off at close range. So if we were to swap in high explosive ammunition in place of the standard ammunition, you might get more damage on that, on that back end of the damage chart, or that front end, I should say, on the right side of the damage chart when you get into close range. But the survivability, right when this thing is at close range, isn't so great. So it makes me second guess. I think if you're in an urban environment or you're playing against other smaller mechs, maybe those HEs are the way to go. If you're playing against bigger mechs or things where they can easily ping this thing with pulse lasers, like Clan Large Pulse or something along those lines, you probably don't want to be messing around with HEs, and you might want to go the other direction and load this thing down with the extended range missiles, whatever they're called, right? The ones that shoot out the 21 hexes, because then you'd actually be able to do more damage on the back half before it even is in that threat range. Because this thing, again, is a TMM of 4 when it's running. If you're at long range, you're 8, plus 8, not even counting gunnery. So if you're gunnery 3, you need 11s to hit this thing at long range. Meanwhile, you could be lobbing in missiles. You're not going to be doing a ton of damage with it, because again, those long range, the extended range missiles only do 1 per pop. But interesting ways you can kind of tune this mech, and I thought that was very cool about this thing. All right, so gunnery sensitivity, as it is configured in the base, right, with the 2 standard tons of ammunition, it's a 0.735, and that's because it is looking at that damage loss when the minimum range penalty comes into play. Obviously, if you're a better gunner, you can overcome that. You can do more damage. So that's an important factor here as well. For me, I don't know that I would put a gunnery 2 pilot in this mech, although I will say, because it is so cheap, a gunnery 2 pilot's not going to cost you a ton. So only 1,200, roughly 1,229 battle value to upgrade your pilot to gunnery 2. That's pretty good. And you could definitely have more reliable damage in that regard. All right, so let's take a look now at roles. I'll tell you about some thoughts on how I would play this thing, and we'll go from there. All right, so a couple of things. When I picked the roles, I picked 3 roles, but I had different loadouts in mind, right? So for, strike, this thing has the speed to get in, right? It does have okay survivability. It can do decent close and mid-range damage, and if you load it out with those high explosive, rounds, I think this thing could be a deadly striker. Again, you have to configure this thing a certain way. You have to put it with lance mates that are going to be more attractive to shoot at. You have to be able to get this thing close, whether it's the terrain or, again, the lance mates or star mates that it's with. Either way, I think it could be an effective striker in that regard. Fire support, for sure. I think if you keep this thing in the back, if you are going up against, again, a lot of pulse bolt boats like the Rifleman 2C or anything ridiculous like that, give this thing the extended range ammunition. Just let it sit in the back and run around, keep its TMM up, and just have it harass. Maybe you'll find a crit or 2, and pair it up with things that, have big, chunky weapons like Gauss rifles and Clan PPCs and things that will bore holes in the enemy and let this guy just find the crits from a long, safe range. Another way you could play this thing is just a sort of a hit-and-run skirmisher with that standard ammunition. Again, 15 hexes is a very solid distance. Even 10 hexes is a solid distance. You could just float into medium range, unload a bunch of stuff, and get out. Your peak alpha strike, if everything hits, is 19 points of damage. That's nothing to scoff at. Again, like this thing, total armor is 76 with 4 tons. So it's basically peeling off almost 1/3 of its own armor, with each alpha strike. So it's pretty solid in terms of the damage capabilities against other lights and maybe less armored mediums. So that's another way I would play this thing. If you do have the extended range or the standard ammunition, I would not get this thing in close range. It's going to die easier. number one. And number two, you're going to suffer from that medium range penalty. So use its speed to keep yourself at medium and long range, and rely on a better gunner because you can dial that up because it's got a lower base BV. Rely on a better gunner and keep yourself further away. I think that's how you get the best return on investment for this particular mech. And don't forget, it does have 360 degree, right? You can arm flip, so you can run away, run straight away, and flip those arms around and shoot things behind you. So again, very versatile, which I love about this particular design. All right, so I'm all wrapped up on this one. Let me know what you guys think about it. Interested if you've actually played this one on the table, or if there's another Locust IIC variant that you really, really like. But again, interested to hear what you guys think, and fact check me on all the things here as you usually do. Keep me honest. I love it. But speaking of loving things, guys, real quick, Ares Games and Minis. If you want a Locust of your own and you haven't gotten one and you didn't get it in the Kickstarter, you can head on over there. He's got all the Mercenaries box sets available that have hit the street. He's got decals, paints, dice, books, all of the things that you need for your BattleTech hobby. So definitely check out Ares Games and Minis. Great prices, fast shipping, phenomenal customer service. One other thing, subscribe, like, leave a comment, share the video. It all really helps the channel, and it really costs nothing. Really appreciate all of you guys that do interact with us. Also, if you want to help out the channel more, you can head on over to Patreon. It's as little as $1 a month. Get you in on the action. You get a monthly look at what's going on, and then higher tiers can get sneak peeks and behind the scenes and the ability to vote in polls and all sorts of neat stuff. So lots of little perks over there. But most importantly, it does keep the lights on and the cameras rolling. Thank you to all of our patrons out there. Without you guys, we certainly would not be doing what we're doing. So thanks again to our awesome patrons. That said, guys, I'm all done. I hope you enjoyed this analysis. And of course, leave me your thoughts on the Locust IIC5. But that said, I'm all wrapped up. Thank you so much for watching. And of course, stay tuned. Always great stuff coming from Death from Above Wargaming. Have a good one.